On this feast of St. Matthew, we hear the call of Matthew, we hear his conversion, and from the vantage point of Matthew. Matthew's the gospel writer here, and he recounts this, and we hear him say at the end, when the Pharisees come in and question Jesus, "Why do you eat with tax collectors and sinners?" As the response is, "Those who are well do not need a physician, but the sick do." It's really one of my favorite, I guess, images of Jesus to pray with is Jesus as the divine physician, of him going around and just healing people, making people whole. And I guess, like literally sometimes I pray with like Jesus just going around and just touching people, right? And being and healing them. But not that the primary healing that Jesus was interested in was healing of the soul. The primary sickness that he's concerned with is the sickness of sin. And so when I think of Jesus as the divine physician and him going around touching people, he's making people, the physical healing's happening, but there's numerous accounts that Jesus explains, right? The paralytic, right? That it's concerned more about making people whole, making us whole, and healing us from sin. And so, but he says, who needs a physician? The sick do. And he's concerned with the sickness of sin. He says, "I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Self-righteousness, or what the Pharisees, he's always railing against, it is like just, if not the single most biggest roadblock for us becoming saints, of us becoming whole, is this righteousness. Yesterday we talked about secret faults. Matthew's the opposite of this. Even the way he writes, like he knows himself as a sinner. And I was thinking, just wanted to read just a section of this book. It's called The Way of Imperfection by he's a priest in the Institute of Pius X, and he says this at the end of, speaking of Saint Francis of Assisi and also Saint Therese of Lisieux, he says, at the end of his life, Saint Francis of Assisi, in a moment of indignation, answered a young man who was calling him the saint. Saint Francis of Assisi said to this young man, "You think that I'm a saint, but you don't know that this evening I could sleep with a prostitute if God would not sustain me." He says, this is the humility of real saints. They know themselves as on the same side as sinners, and at a certain moment, there's no difference between sinners and saints. In a given moment, there's no difference, like at a precise moment, there'll be no difference between the sinner and saints. Saint Therese of Lisieux said something similar. She said, the little flower says, she says, "There's no difference between me and Mary Magdalene. There's no difference between Mary Magdalene and myself." He says, this is the saints recognize themselves as sinners always in the state of conversion. And each sinner, as weak as he is, must recognize himself as a saint in the making. So, like on this feast of St. Matthew, the Lord's saying, I did not come for the righteous, I came for the sick. I'm the divine physician. I want to apply my healing touch to make one whole, to make you whole, to make me whole. We must identify with the wounded. Like those that we think of, when we think of, right, when we're talking about rescue people here at Notre Dame, when we think of those that the Lord wants us to go out and reach, it's important for us to identify with them. Similar to what St. Francis of Assisi is doing, similar to what Therese of Lisieux is doing, we've got to identify with the wounded. And that includes sinners and tax collectors. That's what Jesus is doing here. And if we don't identify with the sick, like we don't allow the divine physician to get close to us. Because what the divine physician wants to do is make us whole. He can't do that if we don't identify ourselves with the wounded and the sick, for him to get close, for him to apply his medicine. The divine physician's medicine. What's the divine physician's medicine? It's love. Love heals. Another writer once wrote, St. Paul, we talked about this weekend, to Timothy, that Jesus, or that the Lord desires all to be saved and come to the knowledge of truth. Salvation and truth go hand in hand. And as one author put it once, love, I think as Peter Crave says, love is the bridge of which truth can cross over. Like parents that know that, are maybe try to drill into truth into your kids, there's got to be the bridge of love to receive truth. Love is the bridge that truth can pass over. Paul to Timothy this past weekend, salvation and truth they're connected. God desires all to be saved and come to the knowledge of truth. But as we are in this mode, as on this feast day of St. Matthew, help us to identify with the most wounded that we can think of, the sickest that we can think of, like St. Francis of Assisi, like Therese of Lisieux, so that the divine physician can get close and apply his medicine, which is love. Love heals. Love makes us whole. And then we follow. We follow the way St. Matthew did today, and that following is an everyday decision, and it's an everyday spot of going lower and lower and lower in humility. That's what the divine physician loves, because then he can just get closer and closer and closer.